These are sensitive conversations involving children, and I hope we can depoliticize these issues as much as possible as we work through the process of implementing these policies into law and regulation in a fair and effective way.
I'm deeply disturbed. The decision that was made by Alberta places kids at risk. I want to talk through these issues. I want to see if we can find a solution through talking to really understand what this is going to mean and the devastation that it's going to bring.
Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith unveiling sweeping changes today to the province's student gender identity, sports and surgery policies. And the feds, as you heard there, have vowed to respond. But as Minister Ian earlier on Power Play said, they won't yet know exactly how. Here to unpack Smith's policy moves and the federal response is our front bench. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is with us. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Former Toronto Mayor John Tory is here, as is former NDP leader Tom Mulcair. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. John, I'll start with you. You heard the Premier in the clip there talk about depoliticizing the process. In the press conference, she also responded to a question about whether this was politically motivated by saying no. Do you think that that is the case?
No, I don't. I mean, you just have to go back to our own party's convention. And look, we've all three of us been party leaders, and we know that, you know, your party, you have to pay some attention to what they're saying because you're the leader of that organization. But, you know, and let's put the surgery aside for a moment. I mean, because the surgery part, first of all, I think it's a solution in search of a problem. I don't think there's a lot of people rushing off at those young ages having the surgery. And people out there, I think, know that in order to even have that surgery at any age, you have to go through years of psychological preparation and so on. But the rest of it, I mean, to me, is just going to put us back in a place where young people are going to be stigmatized, they're going to be afraid, they're going to be isolated, they're going to be alone, dealing with issues they face in their lives that I think we've come to understand are real for more people than we might have thought. And I just think that's a step backwards. And the whole notion, for example, that every time sexuality-related matters and gender-related matters are raised in a classroom, people have to consciously opt in to that, and I guess the parents then have to be involved again, will mean we'll go back to the days where we just didn't talk about these things. And so I'd have to ask myself, you know, in the case of a lot of this, why are we talking about this again in 2024? It's the same as the debate we had here in Ontario a number of years ago about sex education and the fact that, you know, we shouldn't talk about things that kids were doing in the schoolyard. I mean, and I always thought that was so ridiculous that the kids are doing things, whether you think they should or shouldn't be, and the notion we're going to somehow pretend then we shouldn't talk about them in a classroom in a kind of an educational way. So to me, yes, it's political, and I'm glad the federal government are showing some restraint in sitting down and talking first, but I just think it's inflammatory what they're doing, and it's going to cause fear for young people that already have enough issues in their lives.
Christy, what's your sense of that?
I would say it's a hell of a way to deal with an issue that you say needs to be dealt with sensitively. I mean, coming out with a province-wide announcement with, you know, no discussion in advance and just dropping it like, I mean, what the Premier was doing was to try and get maximum impact from this announcement. And you know, the thing about it is, for kids in classrooms, and I agree with John, I mean, kids are doing things, and their lives are changing and all that stuff. We need to be able to discuss it in classrooms. And you know, when I was going to school, there were gay and lesbian kids who could not talk about it at home, and their lives were it was very, very uncomfortable for them. They were really worried about it. And for some of them, it was life-threatening, in a very small number. But still, I mean, these were people I knew and loved, and there wasn't such a small number of them that I've forgotten who they were. However, though, you know, what she's speaking to is an audience of parents who believe that they are, and this is absolutely true, they are the first and most important teacher for their children. They want to be involved in the public education system. They want to understand what's happening in the system, and they most importantly want to know what's going on for their children in the system. But on this specific issue, there is a small minority of parents for whom, and children for whom, this is incredibly difficult. And I just don't think it lends itself to all this political division and this posturing. I don't think it's good for kids. I don't think it's good for teachers in the school system. And I don't think it's good for families and parents either. I don't see how she could be possibly more political about it. And for the federal government, I mean, I don't think there's anything they can do about it. I think they're trying to, you know, I think what she did was she gave Justin Trudeau a huge gift at the same time that she gave parents and kids, you know, an incredible, difficult truth bomb that I think is going to go off in a lot of people's faces for the worst possible results.
Do you think, Tom, on the federal government aspect of this, that they are limited in what they can do? Because there's been a couple ministers, for example, the former Justice Minister David Lametti, who just left politics, who talked about the prospect of constitutional change and his concern about the use of the notwithstanding clause, for example, in the case of Saskatchewan. The current Justice Minister, Arif Virani, has also called the way that Saskatchewan used that inappropriate. Do you think there's any world in which this government broaches the idea of constitutional change on this subject?
There's a pretty long lineup of things that have been done in recent years that would require that sort of constitutional look at the notwithstanding clause. But the very fact that we're talking about it is an indication of the seriousness of the matter and the fact that it has actually become eminently political, despite the protestations of Danielle Smith. Go back to Blaine Higgs, Premier of New Brunswick, first one to start the ball rolling on this. He actually had, much to their credit, members of his cabinet who quit, just saying, we're not going to be part of this, playing games over this. You know, these kids, there is a risk of self-harm. That's been demonstrated. They're already the subject of bullying very often. They need a safe space. They need to be considered in their reality of their gender identity and not finger pointed and becoming an object in a game where you say, oh, this shouldn't happen. I love the way John went through it and just parsed that a lot of this is actually purely theoretical. As he put it, a solution in search of a problem, but it is a political game that's being played. These kids are not footballs. The same thing happened with Scott Moe. He's heading to an election. So this is trying to build a head of steam, building up this 1 million-person march and trying to stoke fear. And because it's complicated, and you have to admit that it's an issue where even the terminology can be quite daunting, and it's not terminology or issues that were dealt with this way just a generation ago. So it's complicated. You have to respect the fact that parents are scratching their heads and saying, but what's exactly involved here? I'm the parent. Don't I get a say in all this? That's the base that Premier Smith is talking to. And I think that the way she's doing it could prove extremely harmful to these young people. And if all of this is about avoiding harm for them, I think she should reconsider how she's going about this.
I think also just really quickly, John, last word. I mean, in the other two instances, it was very much focused on a pronoun policy. And you could see Angus Reid did some polling when parents were asked about the degree to which they should be informed. Like there was a majority of them who did sort of have some feelings of sympathy towards the position expressed by Premier Moe and Premier Higgs. But this is much broader in scope than just about pronoun policy.
Much. And, it's based on something that has been said way too often, that somehow this is a response to indoctrination efforts being made by teachers. I've never seen any evidence of that whatsoever, and like none. I mean, it's an insult to teachers who work hard and are trying their best to deal with kids at a very vulnerable age. And, parents, and look, I'm not disputing the notion of parents being more involved in these kinds of discussions and so on, they should be, but I've been to support group meetings and seen the fact that a lot of the people that are struggling are people that are struggling with these issues with their parents. And so I just think we have to sort of take it away from politics and sit down and sort of decide how we can support people that are going through some very profound issues in their lives and not make them, political footballs.